Assalamu alaikum students. Let's start a new topic today, that is classification of war. It's very important to understand the types of war are surviving in an era where lots of wars takes place. And this is a characteristics of the previous eras as well. In medieval time, wars used to take place, in ancient time as well, and in the modern era as well. So that's why we need to classify war according to the time period. Now my agenda today for the presentation is types of war first of all, and then I'm going to explain each type of war. Okay? Now types of war in modern era. You can see there is a table given in which forms of war are mentioned. On the left hand side you can see the military method mentioned, and on the right hand side you can see the military objectives. And below the military method on the left hand side there is mentioned regular warfare. When there is regular warfare, what is the condition? The regular warfare is having medium intensity, it causes limited war, and it causes, on the right side you can see that it causes physical destruction, destroy capability to fight. Okay? But when we come to the irregular warfare, that which is mentioned below, that cause low intensity. Achha, the example of irregular warfare are terror war and guerrilla war. We are going to discuss these wars later on in the next slides. But you will see something different mentioned here. When such kind of war takes place, that is irregular war, that usually causes psychological destruction. Though it causes physical destruction as well, but more importantly it causes psychological destruction. You can see the people are usually people live in the state of fear during irregular warfare. In guerrilla war, the time period when guerrilla takes place and the terrorist war takes place, this causes a great kind of psychological impression among the people. They live in constant fear. Okay, now below it's mentioned varying intensity of peace, and then you will see on the right hand side zero intensity of violence. We are going to discuss what do we mean by this in the next upcoming slide. Okay, in this slide you can see there is a picture of conventional war. You have probably seen in the movies of the kings and the medieval time period, this kind of warfare used to take place, in which there was face-to-face fighting. People used to ride in horses. This kind of war is known as conventional war. Achha, next come is total war. Achha, this kind of war never existed in the previous era. Keep this in mind. Total war had taken place 2 times in the world, that is World War I and World War II. Why do we call it total war? As you see, it's mentioned a war in which country uses all its human, economic and military resources to fight and seek complete victory over the enemy. In this kind of war, usually industries, agricultural bases and all the human resources, whether you are civilians, whether you are military men, they all are involved in fighting for the same cause, for the country, to defend the country. The purpose is to seek complete victory over the enemy. So what are the strategies involved in this war? There are 4 strategies mentioned. First of all is conscription. Conscription is very much essential. First of all, you must know what a conscription is. Conscription is recruiting normal civilian in the army. Most of the time in total war, you see, as you have seen, you probably have heard that in World War I, the government had recruited normal citizens to fight for the cause, and the people had to participate from every school, every colleges and universities. The students were recruited in the army to fight for their country. And this procedure is known as conscription. The purpose is just to increase the number of military men to serve the country. Second is the government control over key aspects of the economy. Means industry is controlled by the government. They go for rationing. Usually rationing means they just divide the food items in equal numbers so that everyone get the fair share. And most of the food items go to the army because they are playing the major role in serving the cause of the country. And this purpose is also meant to avoid injustice, because you see there is no farming during the war. Usually the farmers also are involved in the war. They are conscripted in the army. That's why most of the time they are short of food resources in the country. That's why rationing is sometimes very much important. Third is government control over media. Media, because it plays a very important role nowadays, as there is a case in the Vietnam War. Media had played a vital role in showing what was going on in the world, in Vietnam as well as in America. And this media had later on paved way for America to withdraw from the war. So this is why we see the media has played a vital role in every war. That's why the government tries to control the media so that it does not show anything which is going wrong against the country. It does not promote any negative influence or any negative propaganda or anything negative against the country or the government. So that is why the government usually tries to control media to maintain law and order situation and the civil morale. Number 4 is targeting civilian as well as combatant in the quest for total victory. Here in the total war, keep this in mind, that the bombs do not make any difference between the civilian and the military man. They try to target each and every person because the purpose is to destroy the enemy in every way. The best two examples are World War I and II, as I have already given. So and the countries which are fighting each other are known as belligerent states. Belligerent states are hostile states and aggressive states. Now the next type is limited war. So far we have discussed conventional war, total war, and now we are coming to the limited war. Limited war is usually, as the name suggests, short and restricted. It's confined to a small area, and usually the civilians are not involved. In this war, conscription usually does not take place because it's not a total war. It's the opposite of total war. And the purpose is to achieve specific immediate goal. And it's a usually short-term goal. And previous wars were usually all limited. They were confined to the borders. All the wars that had taken place in 19th century were limited. But the modern examples of these limited wars are Vietnam War and Gulf War. So one more interesting thing is to note that Vietnam War and Gulf War, they were limited for those countries who were fighting against these two countries. Like America was involved in Vietnam War, it was limited war for America, but keep this in mind, it was not limited for Vietnam. And in the same way, the Gulf War could be a limited war for the Western countries who were involved in this war, but could not be the case in the Gulf, in case of Gulf countries. Now, why limited war is important? Limited war is important because it causes less destruction. And after 1945, limited war had become a necessity because you see in World War II in 1945, two bombs were dropped, one in Hiroshima and the other one in Nagasaki, that caused a lot of devastation. That's why later on it was decided that nuclear bombs should not be used in such a large scale, and it's better to limit the war so that it does not cause a big destruction in terms of population and resources. Okay, now coming back to the limited war, that how it can be limited. What are the ways to limit the limited war? It should confine. The first one is to confining the geographical area in which the fighting takes place. It should not expand. Secondly, limited degree of mobilization, means tanks and aircrafts and the infantry soldiers should be limited to a certain degree. They should not expand. Third is limiting the types of target that can be attacked. It's not necessary that the whole civilian should be targeted, only the military could be targeted, and some areas where the military used to reside, or there are checkpoints. These areas can be targeted instead of destroying the whole country or the city. Number 4 is limiting weapons that can be used. Means it's better to avoid nuclear weapon and atom bombs. Okay, examples are Korean War, Vietnam War, and Gulf War. And let me explain once again, as I was discussing with you people, that in some cases war can be limited for one country, but not in the case of the other. I said this because when Korean War, Vietnam War, and Gulf War were taking place, it were limited for USA and Russia and the other Western countries which were involved, because they had used their limited resources. The army, in terms of army and any industrial equipment. But in case of Korea, Vietnam, and Gulf, they were utilizing all their resources. Human, they were conscripting the civilians in the army. They were putting all the resources in this war effort. Their industries were making weapons, and the civilians were involved in the war. And all the resources of the country were geared towards war effort, like rationing was also done. So this is why in one way the war can be limited for one country, but can be the total for the other. It can be the case. Now the other kind of war is civil war. Civil war is usually the most dangerous for all wars. The reason behind is because the people within the countries are fighting with each other, internal faction. It causes more destruction, because you go to houses, each and every house, and destroy and kill people. So it is the most dangerous war. Now, this kind of war is a conflict between two factions, regions of the same country. It can be political factions, or religious factions, or political, or territorial, or ideological. So, anything which is happening within the state against each other, that may cause civil war. One of the best example of the 20th century, early 20th century, was the Spanish Civil War, as it was fought between two factions. That was the Republican Party of that time that was ruling over there in Spain. Republican government, sorry, not party, Republican government, and the nationalists who wanted to overthrow the Republican government. Now, what is the significance of civil war? The importance, there are three special importance of civil war. First of all, the combatants in the civil war aim to take control of the political and legal institution of the state. The one who takes over the political and legal institution is in control. Secondly, these people are always, or most of the time, are known as insurgents, because they are creating such a situation that is usually not welcomed in the state. That obviously it causes destruction. That is why they are known as insurgents. And as they belong to the same country, they are civilians of that country, and they are doing something wrong in the country, causing a warlike situation. So this is another way, another reason behind to call them insurgent. Thirdly, civil war can be turned into the international conflict. There is a reason behind. Once the civil war takes place and the other countries, the outside world gets involved in the war, taking turns, taking side of any particular faction, so this conflict can be turned into international and becomes more dangerous. And at present, we can take the example of Syrian civil war. As you can see that the most important countries are usually involved in this civil war, taking sides of each party. Okay, now this is guerrilla warfare. Actually, when we heard the name guerrilla warfare, usually this kind of guerrilla comes in our mind, but this is not the case. It will be quite surprising for you to see that the guerrilla is derived from the Spanish word, which means little war. So guerrilla war is basically little war, not a ape like man fighting with each other. This war has become a key feature of the 20th century conflict. In such warfare, rather than attacking the enemy by conventional method, they use tactics. The guerrilla fighters usually use tactics such as ambush. It's a surprise attack and small unit raids against a larger formal army. Usually it creates chaos and confusion. In the early 20th century, Chinese leader Mao Zedong had used guerrilla tactics in Chinese Civil War from 1920 to 1949. This guerrilla warfare continued, and later on, Mao Zedong was successful in taking over the control of the country through this guerrilla warfare. You see, this is the example of guerrilla warfare, surprise attack. This kind of warfare has become very common after 1945. Now there is a reason behind it, why it has become so common nowadays. Actually, many conflicts after 1945 has involved people of Asia, Africa. They were former colonies of their European masters, and they had limited resources, especially military and economic resources, so they could not wage a long and wide scale war against their more formidable enemies. So the other alternative is guerrilla tactics, surprise attacks, and this war can be fought with limited resources, and there are more chances of success because it creates such an atmosphere that is very much uncommon in the Western world. And you see, the second point is also the international coverage of mass media now provides the kind of publicity that guerrilla fighters need in order to win support for their cause, because they show themselves as being victimized by their European more powerful enemies. That's why this kind of international coverage through mass media is very important for them to win the cause. Now, in the present century, some other kinds of wars have also taken place and are taking place nowadays that may be known as Cold War and Hot War. Cold War had started in 1945 and continued till 1991. And in this kind of this is known as Cold War because there was no direct armed conflict, though the belligerent state in the Cold War had fought with each other, but that was not a direct confrontation. Actually, they had fought proxy wars. They had used other countries to fight their wars. They did not attack each other directly. But that's why, as the nature of the Cold War is no direct confrontation, that is why it came to be known as Cold War. And the opposite of Cold War is definitely Hot War, means direct attack and at each other. This war has become the most dangerous of all in the present time, that is known as terrorist war. This is actually a struggle within a group of armed civilian who attacks to achieve their cause, to achieve their political aim. And this also includes violence, including bombing, shooting, robberies, beating, hijacking, any kind of activity that is not welcoming may take place during this terrorist war. It creates psychological impression or fear among the people. Usually it's the most damaging of all war in the present times. Now, terrorists usually try to create a situation in which the enemy population lives in constant fear of violence. Okay, this is the end for today. I hope you have understood the topic well.